ABC Women would like to thank BIPOC Executive Search for sponsoring today's episode.
The BIPOC Executive Search app is here for you. Get information about job opportunities we're recruiting for. Keep up to date and in the know about career news tailored to Indigenous, Black, and other racialized audiences. Gain helpful tips and learnings to help you on your career trajectory, celebrate job appointments, and more. The BIPOC Executive Search app, here to elevate the candidate experience for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Free to download and available on iPhone and Android smartphones.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 woman growing strong. 100 woman where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny, woman.
100 ABC Women would like to take this opportunity to welcome our viewers and listening audience, families, friends, and our sponsors to our inspirational conversations, fireside chats with 100 ABC honorees. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold initiative created by the co-authors, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, a former MP, Donna Jones-Simmons, a corporate diversity executive, and Dr. Denise O'Neil Green, Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion at Ryerson University. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as a website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. We are pleased to bring you a series of fireside chats which include conversations around education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, legal, technology, entrepreneurship, diversity and equity, media, engineering, politics, sports, and so much more. These, we know, are topics that matter to us and to you. These educational and inspirational conversations will be made available to all current and future generations via our 100 ABC YouTube channel. This is a great way to learn from our elders, brilliant-minded and accomplished Black Canadian women. Please join me as I welcome a moderator for this episode, The Professors, by Dr. Denise O'Neil Green. She is the inaugural Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion at Ryerson University and co-founder of the 100 ABC Women Project. Dr. O'Neil Green is also Associate Professor of the School of Child and Youth Care, Faculty of Community Services. Without further ado, Dr. Denise O'Neil Green.
Thank you, Donna, for that introduction. And for today's fireside chat, we are having a conversation with three awesome professors from among the accomplished Black Canadian women honorees. Our Black University educators will share their professional journeys, joy in work, challenges in the academy, ways of connecting with the community, and advice for those interested in the academy as a career. Before we get into our conversation, I want to share with you just a few highlights of these women's accomplishments. First, we have Dr. Ruth Rodney. Ruth Rodney is an assistant professor at York University School of Nursing, where she teaches global health and women's health. She entered the academic and research field with 15 years of frontline nursing experience in a number of clinical areas in Canada and globally. Her research focuses on violence prevention and health promotion, primarily using critical qualitative methodologies to examine how communities can create environments that support healthy relationship development. She is particularly interested in adolescent communities. Dr. Rodney is a Hamiltonian and also serves her community as a board member for the Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association and the Canadian Mental Health Association, Hamilton. She is the proud mother of her son, Kamani. Then we have Dr. Juliet Daniels. Dr. Juliet Daniel is professor in the Department of Biology and the acting Associate Dean of Research and External Relations in the Faculty of Science at McMaster University. She received her Bachelor of Science from Queen's University and her PhD from the University of British Columbia, and has been a faculty member at McMaster since 2000. Professor Daniel's research program is focused on elucidating the role of the transcription factor CASO in cancer and vertebrate development. Her team is also currently elucidating the molecular genetic causes of the disparities in incidence and poor outcomes of triple-negative breast cancer in Black and Hispanic women. Professor Daniel co-founded the African Caribbean Faculty Association of McMaster in 2010 and serves on the President's Advisory Committee for Building an Inclusive Community at McMaster. Professor Daniel also serves as faculty mentor for student members of Women in Science and Engineering and Black aspiring physicians of McMaster. And in recognition of her research and community service, Professor Daniel has received several awards, including the inaugural Canadian Cancer Society Inclusive Excellence Award, among so many others. And last but not least, we have Dr. Malinda Smith, who is the inaugural Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Professor of Political Science at the University of Calgary. Dr. Smith has published widely in areas of international and collaborative politics and equity and diversity and human rights in higher education. She is a co-author of The Equity Myth, Racialization and Indigeneity at Canadian Universities that was published in 2017, and also a co-editor of the forthcoming book, Nuances of Blackness in the Canadian Academy, University of Toronto Press, coming out in 2021. Look out for that publication. She is the editor of 3 books on Africa, including Securing Africa, Post 9/11 Discourses on Terrorism. She is also a recipient of so many awards. Dr. Smith is a 2018 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Fellow and the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the Susan S. Norcutt Award from the International Studies Association just last year in 2020, and the Rosalind Smith Professional Award also in 2020 from the National Black Coalition of Canada, Edmonton. Please join me in welcoming our illustrious professors. I wish we had some background music with the clapping
We'll
and
clap, we'll clap,
yay and all that. Yes, exactly. Yes. So let's just jump right into it. As our viewers, They have heard about your bios. All of you are so very accomplished. And we would like to know, given that there is underrepresentation of Black women in Canada, in Canadian university, maybe that was a Freudian slip, but in Canadian universities and colleges, particularly in leadership positions, can you share with us a little bit about your journey to your current role? And anyone can jump right in.
I think Malinda should go first.
Well, look, thanks
Go
for
for it, Malinda.
that. It's an important question, Denise, and it makes me reflect back. So I'm just going to, in abbreviate form, if I can. So I've spent most of my career as one of the only Black women in my discipline of political science. There are only 7 of us now in Canada. For most of my career, I was the only one. I'm now the only full professor in political science. And certainly, in my university, I'm the only Black person in senior leadership. And that's been the story of my career. And I started out in the Bahamas under British colonialism and journeyed through the US and where I played field hockey, the only Black person on the field hockey team. I went to study abroad, the only Black person in study abroad. What troubles me is that's been a 30-year journey. And we're still seeing situations where we're the only one or the first one. And so I think that reflects the fact that our universities, as most corporations, nonprofit sector, et cetera, are shaped by a culture of cultural cloning. I'll be very direct, cultural cloning and a social reproduction of sameness. That social reproduction of sameness means that Black folks in the academy are often not either pushed out, leaked out early, and certainly that's the case for women. And so we are now having a racial reckoning where there's some attention to this kind of question. But I actually think we need a much more robust discussion around this academic pipeline for Black scholars from high school to university, and certainly for leadership. And so I put a lot of responsibility on senior leaderships, the consultants they find, whether in fact there is attention to the knowledges and skills that Black folks, particularly Black women, bring. It's not about ambition, it's not about a qualification, it's about whether doors are closed. And that's about structures and systems that need to change.
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that, especially when you speak about those firms that do the so-called executive search work. And there are very few of us on their rosters, if any. Professor Rodney, Professor Daniel, how would you like to respond to that question?
My journey, like Malinda's, began in the Caribbean as well. But I came straight to Canada because I was a sucker for punishment, I guess. But even at 18, I had a feeling that the US would not be the place for me because of what I knew about their history of racism. And so when I had the choice, I chose Canada. And just like Malinda, I have been usually the first and the only. And to this day, I'm still the only Black female scientist at McMaster, 21 years, and the only Black female scientist. We've had a couple Black male scientists, but yeah. So that's to me, and to be honest, I didn't notice or think about it my first 4 to 5 years, because like most professors, all you're thinking about is publish or perish, get that tenure. And I wasn't genuinely thinking about the fact that I was the only, until maybe 5 years ago when someone pointed it out and I was like, oh yeah, I just hadn't thought about it, So that was obviously quite disturbing. But what I was noticing was that some of my colleagues were being tapped for positions, and many of them, thinking, well, I'm as good or better than they are, but no one was tapping me. And also, there was actually one of the things that happened when I started, because my colleagues clearly recognized that there were few Black women in science and in academia. They thought they were protecting me. And as again, person in my family to go to have a PhD and to be in academia. So I had very little guidance. And so they were protecting me by saying, you know, as a Black woman, you hit multiple criteria. So everyone's going to want you to be on a committee and you need to focus on getting your papers and your grants and all those things. And so I was put on committees that didn't have a lot of power or influence or skills development, which at the time seemed reasonable to me. But then later on, when I was asking, well, why didn't you think of me or nominate me for such and such position? They would say, oh, well, you haven't served on the grad studies committee or these other powerful committees. And I'm thinking, but you told me not to. So it was this bizarre situation where, you know, they were I think they genuinely were trying to protect me, but they also weren't thinking of the ramifications of that. And then they weren't thinking of how to correct the decision they made for me by saying, wait a minute, it's not that she doesn't have the ability, but we didn't put her in a position to actually climb the ladder. So those are things that definitely Malinda and others, many of us are raising right now and saying, rather than telling women or, you know, anyone of color what they should or shouldn't do, give them the choice to choose the committees that they are passionate and interested in so that they can determine their destiny rather than the system determining their destiny. So, yeah. And so, you know, so I said, so that's happened. And then because of all the, well, I don't think it's because of all the reckoning, but basically, you know, when this associate dean for research position came up, I actually wasn't particularly interested because I had so much on my plate and I didn't even really want to apply. But, you know, several people were like, you should apply, you should apply. You do all of this work anyway. You do so much and you have very little recognition within the university and very little power. And they felt this would be a great way for me to capitalize on all the things I was doing. And so literally I was prodded by several of my best friends to apply. And then I got the position, not because I'm Black, but because apparently I, you know, hit the interview out the park, as they say. My interview was incredibly polished and fantastic. And I had so many skills compared to the other applicants that it was, you know, they were confident and a unanimous decision was made. But I'm sure that many who saw the announcement, you know, in July 2020 were probably thinking, well, this is all as a result of, you know, the anti-Black racism and George Floyd's, you know, murder, when in reality, it was based on my credentials. So I think that's also something that many of us that are now in leadership positions, but especially in the past 12 months, are, you know, some of our colleagues and non-colleagues are thinking, well, that was just a product of this moment we're in and not necessarily because we're equipped and skilled and competent. So I think that's something that we need to think about and get our colleagues and the academy to also think about how they message these achievements. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would say even when there hasn't been a reckoning and we've been hired into these roles, these institutions still have not quite signaled our expertise and what we bring to the table in a very fulsome way. Professor Rodney, what about your journey?
Yeah, well, thanks very much. So I have not been in the academy as long as Dr. Daniels and Dr. Smith. And actually, funny enough, when I started nursing, I never thought that I would get a PhD. I never considered it, nor did I ever consider that I was going to work in a university as a professor. And I actually have to say, really, when I think back to what impacted my decision or when I realized that this was a possibility was when I was at my graduation for my master's degree, and I saw a Black woman walk across the stage and receive the honor of becoming a doctor. And that was the first time that I said, you know, I want that to be me. I want to have the title of being called Dr. Ruth Rodney. And so I think, you know, really when I think back, that was incredibly pivotal, especially too, because, even though I was not born in the Caribbean, I'm the youngest in my family and the only one born in Canada, funny enough. And so when my family migrated here from Guyana, they settled in Hamilton. And really, there was very few Black families. So most of my education, I was the only one. But then coming into a profession like nursing, my aunt was a nurse who went from Guyana to England and then came over to Canada. And so she worked within nursing homes in Hamilton. And so I learned about the medical field. And I think that often for Black women, particularly in the medical profession, we're known as being nurses, but to really see us in the roles of leadership positions within healthcare, we don't really necessarily always have that representation. And of course, that is changing. And the profession of nursing, since I graduated in 2004, has definitely expanded, and there's far more opportunities. But the representation really did matter for me. And I can say that, being a frontline worker for so long and then jumping into academia, it's a completely different ball game. And part of really what made me transition is recognizing that a lot of our stories were not told in healthcare. And the representation that we needed, I think, for our stories to be documented was not there. And so even when I thought about research, I didn't even know that there were different types of research that you could do research with words, which definitely speaks more to how I think. And so I think in kind of, the process of me being a frontline worker and transitioning into academia has been one that's been very organic. And already within the time that I've been in the academic space, I'm already recognizing the challenges that Dr. Daniel and Dr. Smith just spoke about. And so in some ways I am strategic. Being an assistant professor who is not tenured. But I think I've already resolved within myself that I have no desire to sort of give up my integrity to get tenure. And so while I do understand that I have to publish, very much, I think I'm still grounded in being on the front line. And so when I think about some of the ways that we can kind of open up the space more, because Juliet and I are both in Hamilton. So one of the programs that she had for MAC in terms of trying to help to provide a mentorship and a tiered mentorship for everyone at different levels, really where I see that being is within the community. And so a lot of the youth that I typically am around, because I still spend most of the time in the community. I'm actually not on campus that much. I choose to have an office within the community, but a lot of them will say, "Man, you're the first person that I know to have a PhD and to actually speak to me." And so, again, I think just kind of driving home what we already know, that it's not that the potential is not there within our communities, but it's also having the mentorship, having people accessible to you that are able to guide you through the process of how to get into university. And I'm speaking from being a high school student who was told not to apply to UFT because I was Black and that I wouldn't fit in. And so, I would say more than 20 years later, when I speak to a lot of Black youth in Hamilton, they're still experiencing the same issues and maybe even at a higher level. So to even get to the point of being in the leadership positions that we see, the other two panelists in, it means that we have to start by ensuring that our youth are properly guided and directed to go into academia or any leadership position within the academy.
Exactly. And all of your journeys are so unique, but at the same time, there's so many different commonalities that you all face in terms of having that sponsorship, having that support, being the only one, needing to advocate for others, connected to our communities as well. But if we take a look at that, it makes me wonder, why are you doing this work? It seems so onerous. So what gives you joy in doing this work? Juliet, what gives you joy?
Well, I'm joyful all the time. So
I love that. I love hearing that. There's that optimism we have to own, right?
Yes.
I think why I do this, because like I came from a low income family and with very few opportunities, but I think that also contributes to some of what we're seeing, at least what I've been observing since being in Canada, is that, you know, many of us from the Caribbean or Africa, we grew up with Black physicians, Black doctors, Black lawyers. I never doubted I could be anything I wanted to be. And at least in the Caribbean and in Barbados, we were told, once you have an education, the sky is the limit. And so regardless of your class and your social position in the Caribbean, we were, at least in Barbados, as I said, this was drilled into us. You can be anything, but you have to get an education. And that's kind of how they, you know, convinced us to stay in school, especially if you were from a low income neighborhood, right?
Right.
And so I believe that, and I saw it, right? We had Black doctors, lawyers, prime ministers. And so when I came here, like I never had that, I didn't have that weight, I think, and that baggage of inferiority that I think many of our Black Canadian youth have to deal with, because here they're constantly told they're not good enough, they can't do this, they can't do that. And it's not drilled into them by the school system or even the government that get an education and the sky's the limit. Like that's not drilled into the average youth, and it comes from their parents. And if it's only coming from your parents, then that's a lot harder to believe, especially if your parents are struggling and you're living in poverty, then there's like a disconnect, right? So I think when I came here, I just, you know, for me, it's like, well, yeah, I could be a doctor. Shoot, I could be an astronaut. Like I just didn't doubt I could be whatever if I put my mind to it. But I realized it's a challenge for many others. And then, as I said, when I got to McMaster, it wasn't something that I didn't realize this, but I was always fighting for the underdog, even if I myself wasn't in that underdog category. As a postdoctoral fellow, I was fighting and lobbying for women to have maternity leave when I was living in the US, and everyone's like, you don't even have kids. Why do you care? And I'm thinking, because women need maternity leave. Like until men can have children, women are the only ones that can do this, and they need time off to take care of the babies, right? So I've always been doing this unconsciously. It wasn't something that I think I chose to do consciously. It's something that I saw. And if I had the power to do something and to make a difference, I just did it. And yeah, so I don't know.
I love that can do.
Yeah.
And even you're talking about coming from a community where it was drilled into you. It makes me reflect on my own experience. Even though I'm from the US, I lived in all Black neighborhoods. The schools were all Black. The teachers were Black. So you had that reinforcement. Like you said, you can do anything you want to do. What about the rest of you, Ruth, Malinda? What brings you joy?
Look, so my journey again is similar to Juliet's, but I want to say I actually think it's an important question for us to focus on, because often we can focus on if in the school systems, there's a tendency to focus on the tyranny of low expectations. There's a tendency to focus on oppression. We emerge from this, and there's a tendency to focus on the ways in which kind of the idea of Black as lack. And my view is focusing on, one of the things that was interesting to me in the studies that Statistics Canada did on Black youth was that Black youth compared to all other youth had the highest optimism level, which disrupted this idea that gets projected onto Black people of Black as deficit, this deficit thinking, right? So, and so I think that emerges from our families and our communities. I grew up in the Bahamas. My mother always said to me, you'll figure it out. education, education, education. And when I went to the US and went to Canada, that's where I saw people try to impose horizons on me by virtue of being Black and female. And I absolutely resisted. I have zero patience with it. I do not suffer it lightly.
Yep.
You don't suffer fools, right?
No, but also this nonsense being
Yes,
projected onto me. I have things to do and I'm about to do it.
exactly.
So and if that's a problem for you, then move out aside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Get
And
out the way.
so I think Black joy, as going back to Audre Lorde, is it's caring for ourselves, but it's also a form of resistance to this nonsense that we have to perpetually put up with. And so when I look at Black people, I see talent, I see achievements, I see people excelling in whatever they're doing, despite the obstacles. And imagine, I say to myself, there's nothing we couldn't do if those obstacles and barriers and biases and negative attitudes weren't always in our way.
Mhm.
So for me, joy is cultivating, creating space for young people to achieve a world otherwise, to do things differently, and to create a space where I'm no longer the first or the only one. Because that's not just because I am unique or talented, it's because all of us who are around this table are influenced by being from elsewhere. And that is actually an important story because it raises questions about the differences from our educations and experiences and why there are obstacles in the Canadian school system that inhibit and prohibit young Black talent from flourishing.
Yeah.
I think that is something that constantly, as someone who benefits from the Canadian education system, that is something I constantly concern myself with, to make sure that I'm also giving back by helping to remove those barriers and those mindsets that block Black talent. So that gives me joy seeing young people and seeing Black people succeed. And as long as that's happening, the obstacles, move aside.
So I'm still hearing in these answers what you all are doing for other people, but I want to know what you're doing for yourself. So Ruth, I'm going to ask you, how do you nourish yourself? How do you take care of yourself?
And you know what, I would have to say that definitely being a nurse, it's very easy to put everybody else first. And so it's something that I'm constantly learning and getting better at. But the ways that I try to nourish myself is to ensure that I spend time with family. I love being with my son. And, I'm very conscious because he's only 3. And so I'm very conscious of, the important role I have in raising a Black son. And so I won't compromise anything for that. And honestly, I love Carnival. I play Mass every year at Caravana. I would like to take one full year and hit every carnival that is in the world.
I'll join you. I'll join you.
Okay, because I've already done Crop Over. I've already done Trinidad. I've been to Trinidad several times. I was supposed to go to Grenada this year. I would have been at Spice Mass if COVID hadn't hit. So for me,
hold on. Junkanoo in the Bahamas. What happened?
Oh, yes. Listen, wherever there's carnival, I'm there. Okay, I'm there. So for me, really, what I've learned, especially too in being in academia, it's very easy to get roped into this idea that you're not doing enough and that you have to constantly be working. And so I've chosen to really push back against that. Weekends are my weekends. I really enjoy being in the community. And as Dr. Smith said, for me too, having joy is getting to be at tables where I wouldn't have been at had I not had a PhD, and what that means for my community. So one of the things I'm working on in Hamilton is, and with other physicians, is trying to get healthcare workers on the Hamilton Board of Health. And so the way that I've always thought about myself and the way that I kind of move in this world is that I don't move alone. I'm very aware of the fact that I wouldn't be where I am right now if I didn't have the support of my community. And so, my mom is very instrumental in my life. And, just to give you an idea, I was out researching in Guyana with my son, who was a few months old, and my mom was there with me taking care of my child while I was in the field. And so, I'm very aware of kind of the supports that I've had along the way. And so really joy is also recognizing and appreciating my mom and spending that time with her. And so I really just try to take a breath, and I'm trying to get better at, I was even actually reading, Ayanla has this book called And One Day My Soul Opened Up. So I'm a very disciplined person, and I think you have to be at this level in academia. But I'm getting better at being more disciplined with my self-care and ensuring that I take care of myself. And also that also means being within the community. So, and the academic community of amazing Black scholars. So I was just at the Caribbean Studies Association conference this week. And I mean, I said only the Caribbean Studies Conference Association would have a party on the final day on Zoom, everybody dancing, everybody had their flags. And so I look for spaces to also find joy in academia and to nourish my spirit in a way that I find you can't really find the way that I think we support each other as Black people, even across our differences in terms of like where we all come from. I find you don't find that necessarily. It's a different feeling of oneness. And so those are kind of some of the ways that I find joy. And my cup is always half full. I'm in healthcare, so I always feel like things can improve.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And you've spoken so much about community in your answers. My question for you really extends that a bit. What strategies do you use to ensure that your work translates outside of the academy and connects more broadly with the community?
Yeah, so my area of focus is violence against women and girls, and also looking at adolescent relationships. And so really when I think about it is that to ensure that the knowledge that I'm creating, a lot of the communities that I work with are not necessarily going to read an academic paper. And so it's very important for me that my work translates outside of academia. And that means that, I've been on radio stations in Guyana talking about my work. I've written newspaper articles. If I'm asked to speak at different community events, I will go and talk. And I just, in general, I'll mentor youth within the community. And again, I try to make myself as accessible as possible. And I think that also, because coming into academia as a nurse and from a frontline worker perspective, you often see the disconnect. And you're kind of like, what are they doing over there telling us that this is the research that we're supposed to use to inform our care, and this isn't how it is on the ground? And so I think because I have both those perspectives, I'm really aware of ensuring all the research that I do, I'm not researching for the sake of researching. I'm researching to ensure that I'm improving women's lives. And again, making sure that the information is there sort of also as an advocacy tool, particularly when, you're looking and focusing on gender-based violence. This is work that's been going on for decades, and still we seem to be inching forward. And so making sure that anything also that I write is accessible. And that means that, while I make sure that I'm meeting all the requirements I need for academia, it's me focusing on making sure that my knowledge is disseminated in many different ways to various audiences, and being able to switch my language. And so I never thought I would speak like an academic, but I realized when I read some of my work, I'm like, man, that was me. I wrote that. So I recognize my language has changed. And I think that, that's also part of making sure that you can cross the lines between academia and community, is to know how to change your language so that whatever you're researching can also be understood within the community.
I hear that. And Malinda, I think you do an awesome job. I see your name all over the place, every news outlet, a committee being announced,
Twitter.
Absolutely, Twitter. Well, you know what? The social media has really provided additional voice for academics, especially those of color and Black women in particular. Malinda, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think translating, even when I was an assistant and associate professor, I resisted the idea that we shouldn't be doing newspaper or magazines or radio or television, because you're always thinking about illiteracy in certain ways. And academic journals were not going to be the sources of our liberation or our sources of freedom. So I actually believe translating the research and scholarship, they can go into journals, they can go into books, but you actually need to make them intelligible for broader audiences. But the second thing is I do that with data, right? So I think that when I do the diversity gap research, data literacy is not everybody's forte. Not everybody likes statistics. Not everybody is Dr. Judith. Not everybody like the two scientists who are here, right? So how do you make it intelligible so people actually can see that despite the stereotypes or assumptions, in fact, the evidence, if you're looking at this data, isn't borne out, say, around Black achievement or representation or racial profiling. And I say to people, if my research is on racism and racial profiling or achievements in the academy in terms of the professoriate, the diversity gaps in leadership, if you take something as simple as Black people, so skin stereotype, 124 different countries, all across the African continent, the Caribbean, Canadian-born, Nova Scotia, multi-generational. How on earth can you stereotype a judge in British Columbia or the lieutenant governor, the first African Nova Scotian, except for the fact of a kind of stereotype? We can't do that. I mean, we know each other better, and we can't stereotype each other. So for me, that actually is, my research is one way, and translating it is one way of giving back to community. But it's also actually connecting with young people, with community organization. They hold us accountable. They hold us accountable, but they are also the sources of joy. When I moved to University of Calgary, it was in COVID times. And so when I met Black faculty and students and clinicians, they were telling me all the good stuff, where to eat, where to get takeout, where to get good music. This is Zoomville, right? And so I thought, that's sustaining me. That's sustaining me in moments when the work is not enough to give you life and joy. But also, I must say, I do like this work. And people say, why don't you do something different? EDI is, not the sexiest thing. There's not a lot of progress immediately. But my view is an opportunity and a space to help connect community to the university and to bridge those divides and to create equitable pathways for people to move in. And so, the community sustains me, and my way, it has to be a two-way street, but we are part of the community. We live in it and we benefit from it. So it's a two-way street, and without it, we would not be sustained.
Absolutely. So I'm really sorry. We are going to have to bring this conversation to a quick close, but I want to give each of you at least 30 seconds. Maybe more than 30 seconds. Give you just a little bit of time, because the producers have said we have a little bit more than just a minute or so. So I want to get to this question about advice you can provide to other women who are interested in coming into the academy, but needing to balance, children, having children, other kinds of responsibilities that you have as as women, that we have as women. So we have about 5 minutes or so. If each of you could just give a few lines of quick advice that you would give. I know that's a whole nother show, actually, but I'm going to kick it to you, Juliet.
Yeah.
So I would say that it's when I had the decision to make after my postdoc, should I go into industry or should I go into academia? I had a friend who finished their PhD the same time as me and went into industry. And he had these very restricted vacations. So it was like 3 weeks vacation a year, clock in, clock out. Also, he was a scientist as well. In industry, you get a project, you have a finite time to finish it. And if you don't finish it, literally they come in, remove all the reagents, the lab books associated with that project and said, this isn't moving fast enough, you're on to the next project. I am a curiosity-driven person, and I don't think science can be like, you can say, well, we've got 1 year. Like eureka moments come when they come. We don't have all the data at the time, and sometimes it requires 5 years to get to the endpoint. Anyway, all of that to say that by the time I was trying to make a decision, I had been in academia for, my PhD and my postdocs. I've been in academia 12 years. And the freedom of being in academia and deciding, well, I want to work from home today, or you know what, I just feel like taking 2 days off to just hang out with some friends that happen to be coming through Vancouver en route to some conference, and I can just take the time off and do my experiments at night or the weekend without having to justify it or ask for permission. And the same with having kids. Like it's the kind, like we had a grad student while I was a grad student, it was an unplanned pregnancy in the sense that she and her husband wanted kids, but it kind of was like an oops moment. But basically she just, she would bring the baby into the lab and put it into the professor's office. And then we would all take turns taking care of it. You wouldn't be able to do that in many professions right now. Like there's no way you could do that. But we had all the students basically taking turns, taking care of this baby while she did her experiments. There's just so much flexibility, I think, in academia that I think it's a great space actually for women that want to have a family and want to have kids. I mean, yes, it frustrates us sometimes, some of the policies, but I think it's one of the most flexible professions because it's almost like being self-employed. So you can call your own hours, you can make your own decisions about timing. And that I think is quite meaningful and helpful and useful for many women. So coming from a scientist perspective, I don't know, but I would like to think the social sciences are similar to science, but definitely in science, it's a fantastic place to be in if you want to have a family and raise kids because of that flexibility. And you do get to delay the tenure clock when it comes to promotions, et cetera, for every child and maternity leave that you take. So.
Yeah, and I would say that when I was actually completing my PhD, it was a cohort of maybe 9 women. Most were mothers, and those who weren't mothers became mothers during that journey. I walked across the stage 9 months pregnant. And so I would say that, I think mothers are incredibly great with time management. And already have a way of organizing themselves that you figure out a way. A lot of the skills that I think you have in parenting translate into academia in terms of problem solving and figuring out how to do things, and also giving yourself a bit of grace when things don't necessarily go according to plan. And I would also tell women to sort of push back or not to feel that you can't do it, because there are many women. There's a lot of parents within academia, and definitely you can find that support and advice from other colleagues who are in similar situations with their family. And I would again too say that if you have the support, it's important to have a village. And so when you have that support, then you have other people that can help you with your children when you need to do data collection and you're still breastfeeding.
I'll keep
Go ahead, Malinda.
I'll keep it somewhat brief. And in my comments, to say is I actually think that mothers are some of the most disciplined people ever in terms of organization. So I encourage whether you're a master's student or a PhD student or postdoc to actually collaborate and network with others in terms of even writing, in terms of childcare or co-childcare. I've seen some of the most effective collaborations actually be with scholars who started out as graduate students with families and are still supporting each other and co-mentoring each other now as assistant and then as associate professors. And that's actually a journey of a friendship. But my view is never let any chair or anyone discourage you. If you want children, never let them discourage you. That's why we have benefits, so that people can do these kinds of things. And then pace yourself. I actually think our extended families have been invaluable for us in this way. So I think things are improving now for mothers in the academy, but there are still obstacles and biases and roadblocks. And so that the best way to deal with that is actually as a collaborative exercise.
And I just want to add that I find it disturbing that men are never asked this question. Mm-hmm. Right? Like men are never asked about making the choice between having a child and pursuing their careers or their desires.
That's because caring and care work is still predominantly women, and that's actually part of the challenge to women, gender equity in the academy is the uneven household work, but also the uneven work in the academy, what I call the housewifely work, all the service work that women do in the academy. So that's true for women, Black women, who I often think get considered to be the help. We supporting someone else rather than leading. And we are nobody's help. We are here to also lead and to support each other, but also to help build our universities and the communities that we are in.
Yeah, that's right. My apologies, had some technical difficulties there, but you women are so fabulous. You just kept moving on, and I love the advice that you gave. And in the academy, there is this whole literature base called Motherhood and Mothering in the Academy, which definitely speaks to much of what all of you said. Well, I have to say it was an absolute pleasure to be the moderator for this session called The Professors. I almost feel as though that should be a reality show or something of that nature. But
I say let's do it. I love that.
Hey, I'm ready. I have one called The Faculty only because of all the drama I see, but in any event, thank you all so much for sharing and giving of yourselves today and sharing with our audience your fabulous journeys and your advice and your wise counsel and experience, and look forward to seeing many more things from all of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 woman growing strong. 100 woman where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny.